custom made, customized, bespoke, made to measure, tailor made. These are all terms we hear often enough. We seem to go to great lengths to design and have certain articles made and manufactured to our exacting requirements and standards and specifications. We are willing to pay top dollar for that. And those of you who follow our platform a little bit will, in any case, not be surprised to, hear me reiterate my disdain for standardized education. Although I always preface that by saying I understand why it's required and why it's done. But it strikes me as a particular irony that in certain realms of our lives, we are so adamant and hell-bent on customizing the product and service that we seek. And in other areas, including most surprisingly, therapy, mental health interventions, that sometimes we are I don't blame clients because it's probably not their task for it to occur to them, but it doesn't even occur to us that perhaps theories, modalities, tools, set precedents that are being used in a therapeutic setting have been, who are the people who sort of conceptualized them? What are the type of people or sample sets they are based on? Where those insights have come from, whether they apply to us or not, how applicable and relevant they are we very different? All of those things make it really something to investigate for sure. That is it not, would logic not dictate that in the therapeutic realm and setting, certain tools that are being used also be very, very hyper localized and be mindful and aware of certain realities that make the person who's in that room receiving that therapy make that modality or that tool uniquely relevant to them. So, joining us to discuss this amongst several other things is the very erudite and very learned senior clinical psychologist Sindhu Upadhyay Wadhwa. We are very privileged to have her and extremely grateful for her time. She's also the founder of Mind Guild. And really speaking, this entire session is entirely owed to her and thanks to her, because this very, very critical area of investigation itself, the theme, also came from her, and we're very grateful for that as well. So, without botching up her introduction, which I will ask her to do herself, let me at least welcome Sindhu and extend lots of gratitude for her time and for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Karthik. I don't think I need to add anything more to the wonderful introduction that you just shared. I've been working in this space for over 22 years. I see patients or clients from 16 to 65. We are talking individual sessions, we're talking couples sessions, and family therapy. And we are talking today of something so fascinating that I have discovered through my years of practice, that any deep work, whether it's therapy or any sort of really internal work, it has a strange habit of peeling the wallpaper of society, right? And it just exposes the scaffolding. So I suppose our discussion today would be very honest and reflective and observational in that sense. and hopefully less clinical, because I'm known to make everything clinical and I really want to just have a conversation about things.
That's music to my ears because I'll be at sea if you were to make it very clinical. And in all fairness, the whole idea of this series, broadly speaking, is to make it as relatable and relevant and understood by the sort of layperson. But before we get into that, if I may ask you, you're very, very modest in speaking of your work. I know that you've had multiple pursuits and you continue to don several hats. But in and amongst all of those, do share a little bit about Mind Guild, please.
The Guild is going to be a collective of psychologists and psychiatrists across India. Our pursuit would be to establish a sort of a society of learning for people who already have degrees, but now want to focus on very specific adaptations and molding for meeting the needs of the society we live in and operate within. Look, psychotherapy or psychology largely, it developed in a very specific cultural environment, right? So Europe and North America primarily. Now, those societies shape the questions all of us are asking, the assumptions we are making about human beings, families, independence, self, satisfaction, identity. But when these theories travel to places like India or collective society, the human brain, while the basic architecture remains the same, the social choreography around it changes, right? And brain is largely a contextual law. So the social architecture around the brain that is completely different in, say, Africa or China or India to Spain or America. So we want to meet the needs of our society. I think I want to bring back, not bring back, sorry, I want to invest a lot of energy, resources, educational pursuits to train people to um, do better job of therapy or internal work. We don't want it to be generic, even though we owe a lot of gratitude to the giants that whose shoulders we are standing on. That is absolutely true.
Of
But in
course.
my experience, and Karthik would agree to this, that ignorance of context, it can actually do more harm because a therapist or a healer or a worker working with the brain may apply technically correct intervention, but might end up destabilizing the client's social world. So I suppose we are at that crossroad of our growth as a society where we should be asking ourselves what works for us and why hasn't it worked so far? Where are we going wrong? So this is where I'm really interested in building spaces like the Guild, where psychotherapy is taught with deep attention to cultural identities. We are not abandoning science at all, but integrating it with lived context.
Well, this is equally fascinating and absolutely critical. I'm so glad you're doing this. At some point, I suppose I'll nag you for a separate session on and around this, but it also serves as an ideal segue for us to actually begin our discussion around this in the first place, because I remember that when you and I sort of chatted off the record, there were certain things that you mentioned that really sort of stuck with me and struck me. Speaking of the cultural context and vast differences, it's sort of easier said than done to tell a client you need to make boundaries now, and then to go back into that social milieu and construct that has existed, for lack of better expression, Alcatraz for so long, to actually make that happen. So I suppose my question is that while we speak about this in theory, Would you mind contextualizing this with a few simple examples that all of us can understand really?
Absolutely. So, Karthik, I remember a young client who had studied abroad and came back to India feeling deeply conflicted. In therapy, she kept saying, everyone tells me that I need to set boundaries with my parents because they're very needy, they're very clingy, or they call me 3 times a day. They keep asking me if I've eaten food or if I've slept well. Now, in a Western context, that sentence makes perfect sense. Independence is treated as a marker of emotional maturity in most societies. But for her, the moment she tried to even think or implement that advice, she did not feel empowered. She felt morally wrong, almost like she was betraying something sacred in her family structure. So the question was not whether boundaries as a concept was useful or it is useful. Of course it is. The question is, how do they exist? How do the concepts of boundary, space, emotional language, verbalizing love, how do they exist inside a culture where interdependence is not a dysfunction? We do not consider it a dysfunction. So, how do we understand it? Because it's almost rooted in our identity. Now, I have also seen something interesting with emotional expression. In many Western therapeutic frameworks, openly verbalizing feelings is a sign of, say, a good balanced psychological health. But in many Indian families, love is expressed through action. So a father may never say, I love you, I'm proud of you, but will wake up at 5 a.m. to drive you somewhere, right? And if a therapist interprets emotional restraint as repression,
Hmm.
they completely miss the emotional grammar of that family. And I
So
really
true.
understand, I want people to understand that a theory without context can become something strange. It starts as science and slowly turns into another form of intellectual imperialism with a very evolved and sophisticated vocabulary, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But you make absolutely excellent points and such wonderful examples, particularly the one of the fathers.
Yeah.
But I want to use your earlier example to prod you a little bit more. So let's say this boundary setting is difficult, is seen by both parties involved, by the client as, something that she's doing, betraying the elders, by the elders as pretty much the same. Now, when we speak of approaching this whole thing with a deep understanding of local factors, would that therefore mean that the logistics and the manner in which the boundary setting is done would change, being the advice, or would it be replaced altogether by some other solution?
That's a beautiful question because almost every Indian listener right now, Karthik, will recognize themselves somewhere in the question and the answer. Let me start with an example, okay? And I suppose we can go deeper once we share this example. I once worked with a young professional who was planning to again move back to India after several years abroad. But he was moving to the same city as his old parents, wanted to have his own place, a home, an apartment where he could live, breathe, play games, call friends, and just be. It was a conversation he struggled to even bring it up with his parents. An unmarried man in the same city, why would he want to even live separately? That doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely.
Now, every time we try to have this conversation, he said, but Sindhu, I feel like I'm becoming a bad son. Notice the language here, Karthik. Not assertive, not saying that independent son. He used the word bad. Now, this tells us something so fundamental. In many collectivist cultures like ours, the problem is not that people don't understand boundaries. Conceptually, we get it. The problem is that boundaries collide with deeply internalized idea of goodness. Bad son, opposite, good son. Idea of loyalty and goodness is such a deeply internalized concept. So in Western therapy models, independence is a great thing. It's, like I said, a marker of a well-adjusted, a well-adapted adult. Now, maturity in Indian family actually historically has meant something else. It's the ability to absorb the discomfort for the stability of the family, the larger good. So the person who tolerates everything is a good son, very adjusting. The person who says, well, this actually doesn't work for me, I'm going to live independently, very quickly can be labeled as difficult or
Selfish.
selfish. Now, humans are wired for belonging, but they're also wired for autonomy. All of us, healthy cultures, evolve in ways to balance these forces without dismissing cultural nuances. When a therapist works with a client who's conflicted or caught in the crossfire between two different things, our job is to first enter their world to understand where the struggle is. Now, without letting one particular culture or one particular belief dominate completely. It's not absolute duty, it's not radical individualistic culture, but it is to figure out in what way can we help this individual flourish, not function, but flourish.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, the needs of this individual would be very different. Now, let's say this particular client wants to live independently. We need to work with ways where they are able to manage the duty, the responsibilities of aging parents without letting go or subjugating their need for autonomy. So, how do we come up with ways that can fairly balance the two, where the individual sees growth and not abandonment?
Can I just quickly? I'm so sorry, but I'll forget later. I completely see that logic, and I appreciate it. Having said that, I think you'll agree that in an Indian context, that's all I know in any case, is that by the time that individual embarks on this navigation process, the very fact that that proposition has been put forth, a certain damage is already done.
Hmm, you're right. And here we are talking about how love sits right next to resentment, isn't it? Like, you've been denied a lot of things, or you're denying yourself. It almost feels like self-abandonment, right? And slowly over a period of time, these unexpressed boundaries will give way. It'll almost become a petri dish for resentment to grow. So when we are articulating this or psychoeducating families, we are talking about one, changing times. We're talking about a boundary is not a rejection of family or duty. At its healthiest, a boundary is simply a piece of honest information which says, this is where my capacity ends, and this is where I need the relationship to meet me halfway. It's not as selfish or dirty as our parents or parents before our parents may have understood
Of
boundaries.
course, of course.
It is honestly just an information I have about myself, which is, this is all that I have capacity for. Meet me halfway. I want to do both.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a very, very good way of looking at it. Yeah.
it's a complicated family conversation to have, I'll be honest there. And you got to see if you could get a glimpse of the family therapies I have, the family systems therapy work I have. It is, it's like doing doctoral every session because this is every time I'm sitting with an Indian family with mixed exposures to different global things, I notice that every generation is fighting to protect what they considered a, a very monumental survival mechanism.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, Karthik, all of us are essentially a bunch of survival mechanisms.
Hmm. Hmm.
Our
Hmm.
personalities at its very core are what? Adaptations. Our beliefs. our habits, our pursuits, frameworks, all of them are just adaptations. They made us feel safe once. We may have outgrown them, or maybe we have grown more into them, but those are personalities. So you have a room full of people with different personalities, all of them with one similar collective aim. And remember, even the child or the adult child in the family, that room, does not want to break the family. They just want to breathe better. Do you know what I mean? Like you and me, Karthik, when we are talking with our families, we want to express our opinions without being dismissed. But we don't.
I had a slightly, I had a thought while you were just sharing what you did right now. So would it broadly be fair to say that, and until a point where these systems that we each of us is a collection of, until those systems, or until rather we are fighting for those systems to be accepted, we will be merely functioning, and only after genuine acceptance is there any chance of flourishment.
Acceptance would be the very first step we'd need to take. But even before acceptance would be the need to be aware or the ability to connect without correct. So,
Hmm,
connection without correction, right?
hmm, hmm,
How
hmm.
many of us as parents actually listen, truly listen to our teenagers or our children talking? How many times have we entered their worlds to understand what they are about, right? We are a society suddenly where a lot of young people, and you would have seen this in your work too, everybody walks in with remarkable psychological vocabulary now. You have 9-year-olds talking about trauma and attachment styles, right? With access to social media and the super bombardment of everything, right? So very interesting thing has happened in the last few years. Everybody is arriving with these rich emotional vocabulary. Awareness is increasing. So we have become very good narrators of our stories, but very poor editors.
Hmm,
Okay, so we can tell our story, but we don't know how to work after awareness and insight. It
hmm.
becomes so seductive. This idea of insight is seductive, but actual change is the hardest part. It's inconvenient. So I don't want to digress from your primary question because that was a very good question. Yes, it does start with acceptance, but even before that, keeping our eyes open to what we are wanting to accept. And at the end of the day, are we all working towards one cohesive goal? For us, our society to continue to function, we will need to have certain larger shared umbrella goals. The big sky view of things is still survival of the tribe, not the rise of an individual. And if I can just share this, sorry, I'm a talker.
No, 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 please, please. This is very, very relevant and interesting.
One of the interesting things I figured out is, or I find people say a lot or speak a lot about, is how self-sufficient they are, or
Hmm,
how self-made they are.
hmm.
And this belief that humans are supposed to be emotionally self-sufficient is a bunch of horseshit. I'm sorry. Modern culture runs on that idea. You're supposed to regulate yourself, fix yourself, heal yourself, me, I, improve yourself. This self help aisle is basically an instruction manual for becoming a one person ecosystem. And one person ecosystems are not doing very well around the world. Therapy walks in at that point and says, hey, hang on, we are co regulating mammals. We are not standalone ecosystem. That's not how neurobiology or nervous system works. So because we are co-regulating animals, we are always going to regulate ourselves or form belief systems or evolve or flourish in interaction with other people. So
Hmm.
why are we talking suddenly so much about great insights, great awareness? I need this, I need that. Sure, you do. But let's look at the larger context. In order for change to occur, other things around you will also need to change.
I can offer you an extremely unscientific hypothesis,
Okay.
which is that because generations prior to us have been so removed from any acknowledgement of things to do with wellness, contentment, purpose, identity, and all of these things. And now suddenly you find a generation that, as you very rightly said, is suddenly awake to all of these fancy terms and they know what to use where and in what context. I think that there's a bit of overexcitement and overstating and exaggeration, which will sort of settle in. It's like any sector that starts booming and then there's a shakeout, and only the couple of authentic players remain. I
Okay.
really think that is something that might happen. It's just this initial flirtation with this new world altogether.
It's not all bad, though. It's not the boogeyman of our culture.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot worse, of course.
In the late 19th century, I don't know if you remember, a lot of studies were about left-handed people being forced to use the right hand, right? Now, suddenly they saw a boom
Hmm,
in number of people who said they're left-handed. It's
hmm,
not that suddenly or overnight, the number of people born to prefer left hand that emerged. That's not what
hmm,
happened. It's
hmm,
suddenly the conversations were normalized,
hmm.
awareness increased, and therefore identification of left-handed individuals increased too. Similarly, I mean, I don't want to rubbish it and say it, though I love your example.
Hmm.
I agree it's going to settle. But a lot of conversations around emotional health is what is building much more monumental conversations about changing society and policies. Public policies can be changed depending on the conversations that's gaining momentum.
Absolutely.
Also, remember, economic factor changes the way something is seen. So more women now are in boardrooms who are facing crisis. So therefore, suddenly the government cannot ignore. So more conversation will
Oh,
build up to changes.
absolutely. I mean, public discourse at the end of the day is very important.
The problem is when it's awareness, when it's just conversation. Um, and this is the biggest thing I've realized in my 20 something years of experiences. Human beings are actually far less mysterious than we imagine. Far less mysterious than we imagine. But we are far more frightened and far more resistant to change than we admit. And I want people to hear this because a lot of people assume therapy is about discovering something absolutely new about yourself. In reality, most of the people already know the truth. They know their habits, they know relationship is unhealthy, they know they're people pleasing. The real difficulty is not in discovering the truth. The difficulty is in tolerating what that truth will require, right? I once worked with a man who came in saying that he wanted to heal from the past. Now, that was his exact phrase, very sincere, very determined. But every time we approach the possibility of changing even one small dynamic in his behavior, say saying no to something, asking for respect in a relationship, he would become extremely anxious. Finally, one day he laughed and said, Sindhu, I think I like the story of being the strong one who tolerates everything. And that sentence was incredibly honest.
Yeah,
Sometimes our pain becomes a part of our identity. If you let go of the pain, you're also grieving a part of your identity,
yeah, of course you are.
right? So, what I'm saying is that it has to be a little more than just awareness. So, even with cultural adaptations, we can know certain things don't work in our society, but how do we then, like you very rightly pointed out in one of the questions, we know this doesn't work for us, but we still want the individuals to flourish. How do we make that happen? Where is that mid ground, right?
Mm, mm. And
So,
in fact, sorry, please continue.
go ahead, go ahead.
In fact, on that, and just to sort of bring it back and perhaps we could conclude today's interaction on this and maybe revisit it. Uh, because we've been talking about uh, tailor-made solutions, or let's just say a deeper awareness of local and factors that matter. Um, I'm going to preface this by saying that admittedly, there is still in large parts of India a certain class of people that is actively seeking mental help, and it's not across the board, but it is starting to ever so slowly change and bring more and more of the society into the fold. And because we are such a complex and diverse country, where even within a city which itself is at a certain sociological stage of its evolution, there will be localities where people will be very, very different in terms of their thought processes and ideologies and ethos. Where do we draw the line in terms of, how a mental health professional then makes themselves aware of realities? Because it's so relative and it's so diverse, even within our country.
It's actually a very big and a loaded question because now suddenly my mind is thinking of several examples. I want to start with the idea of spirit possession. Karthik, you go to any tier two or tier three city, you will notice that the local communities have religiously sanctioned individuals who
Hmm.
have spirit possessions.
Hmm.
Science tells us this is dissociative hysteria or dissociative distress, right? The idea is not to rubbish the science. The idea is, yes, it is rooted 100% in reality, that a stressed brain is going to dissociate itself from reality and come up with multiple ways to deal with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, when I say go to a place like in UP, there's a place called Balia, and there, the temples that are there, you have women and men getting into a trance. They say Mata aa gayi hai or God is speaking through me. Even in south of India, we have similar things, right? If that person were, say, in Brisbane or in London, they would immediately be taken to emergency services and put on antipsychotics. A grassroots level Anganwadi counselor or a district counselor or say that town's counselor or therapist, that person will first try to expand the playing field of understanding. And this happens in Nigeria or in other cultures too, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the idea is not to enter their world and call it a delusion,
Of course.
but use the voices that apparently speak to them to course correct the dissociation and the intensity of dissociation, the distress it might be causing, or
Hmm.
the dysfunctionality it might be causing in their everyday life. So, a woman who stopped working because she gets possessed or it goes into trance very often, my worry is how stress is a brain that it's not able to get back to homeostasis or equilibrium. So, as a scientific worker, but working within a cultural context, my job is to understand both, right?
Hmm.
Include the culture, cultural competence, while the scientific temperament remains. Use what's available to you in order to correct or treat them. So,
You brought up such a critical point, because oftentimes what happens is that the moment a quote unquote foreign resource or entity enters a particular milieu, even if it is their genuine feeling and or plan to demonstrate a certain amount of acceptance and sensitivity to beliefs long held by that community also often sees that person before anything has even transpired as a threat, as somebody who's there to sort of tell them that, oh God, you uneducated idiots, and we are going to do this and that and the other.
Yes. Yes, and in fact, the same sort of experiences in communities are treated as social events. So the healing happens through community, through villages, through a group of people who
Hmm.
reduce the verbalizing and the expression of stress. We don't isolate them. And thousands of examples, like the increase in postpartum depression now, because I work a lot with women's mental health, I've noticed the increase in postpartum depression, psychosis, and a lot of postpartum complex mental situations have also occurred because we are super atomic in our existence. From nuclear, we have gone atomic. We are not anymore raising our children in a village. And when I say village, it's metaphorical way of saying that raise a child in a community. A child is best raised in a village, whether it's a village that you choose, your friends, your relatives, your neighbors, but it reduces the demands that your brain goes through during
Hmm.
a very critical period of neuroendocrine overhaul. So I am all about, and most, I think it's happened in the last decade, perhaps. I have returned to understand the beauty of Eastern philosophy and sensibilities of collective society. Do I like all of it? Do I celebrate all of it? Absolutely not. I think abuse is still underreported. I think a lot is tolerated in the name of good versus bad. Just 3, 4 days back, I remember I met someone who says very kindly to me, "Hey, you don't look like someone who struggles with ADHD." Now, Karthik, in our discussion, I've spoken about this. I live with ADHD, I deal with chronic metabolic health concerns, and I also have trigeminal neuralgia. Strange psychological space, okay? But people see a finished version of me. They see a therapist who goes for these talks, articulates, highly functional, runs a family, and I write and do tons of things. What they don't understand is the internal experience of many people like me. We might look high functioning, but the external does not match the internal always. In
Hmm.
fact,
Hmm.
for that congruence to occur, I have a team full of, or I have a family full of incredible individuals who make me function every day, right?
True. Yeah.
Now imagine somebody randomly comes and says, "You don't look like you have ADHD." People expect me to look chaotic. People expect somebody to look repressed. I remember my relative said when Deepika Padukone came out with her statements about depression many years ago, "But uske paas to sab hai. What does she have to be depressed about?"
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that that is, of course, a whole different animal onto itself. But what you were just speaking of earlier, I promise you're preaching to the choir. In fact, drawing from the fabulous lives of Bollywood celebrities, although I hate that term, it takes a battery significantly larger than any of their teams to keep me high functioning. So I know what you're saying.
Absolutely. 100%. So,
Yeah.
but we have a lot of work to do. We have miles to go before we sleep.
Well, finally, as we really do now close this, I want to ask you, and I'm not trying to be needlessly facetious, but when these realizations do come to you, as they have over a period of time, that maybe this doesn't really work in the Indian scenario, this, that, and the other, do you start to perhaps feel that do you have a very diluted perception of the work that you've been doing hitherto?
No, well, that's a difficult question to answer. No, I don't think I have a diluted perception of it. I think I have a lot of respect for the realization that we were going in a wrong direction.
Hmm.
And I also think that the momentum is so right now with a lot of voices coming in and the societies need changing. So I'm more grateful than worried about how diluted it was. We work with what we had, and now we want to work with more. We
Right.
work,
And the fact that that understanding has come is in any case as a direct consequence of the work you've been doing.
well, that's well put. Yes, absolutely.
Because it wouldn't have come otherwise.
100% agree. Couldn't
Yeah.
have. Yes.
Wonderful. It's such a coincidence that you mentioned Balia. I'm due in Balia for a few days next month. I'm visiting a school that we work with there, doing a TED talk, interacting with the faculty, the kids. So I'm really looking forward to it. I believe this particular school has had a transformational impact on the town itself.
Okay.
And a lot of mindset shift has happened amongst the general community of Balia. So I'm very curious to be there and sort of hopefully experience some of that.
Very interesting, Karthik. And I hope you, if ever you need extra hands to work on projects like this, count me in. Balia is, in some sense, my father's roots.
Okay.
So I would love to work with these towns and places where real change needs to happen.
Hmm.
Right.
Great. Thank you very, very much for your time. That was a lovely interaction. I'm sorry I have kept you quite a bit longer than promised, but really appreciate your time and all your insight.
I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much. Bye now.